There, guys. We want to join God where He's at work when it comes to multiplying disciples. We can't convince anybody. We can't recruit anybody, because if we do, we've got to keep convincing them, keep recruiting them. So what does it look like to identify where God's at work? Let's talk about that in this video so that you can see where He's at work in your city, in your disciples, and you can join Him in that. That's coming up. Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the Multiplying Disciples channel. My name is Mark, and it's great to be with you as we look at simple, practical ways that are both powerful and strategic to help you multiply disciples, churches, and leaders until there's no place left that hasn't heard. So in this video, I want to unpack for you this idea of joining God where He's at work. And I've shared with you in some recent videos about that idea that, if we recruit somebody, we've got to keep recruiting them. We've got to keep convincing them. And, that's just not the way of Jesus. Jesus did not try to convince people to follow Him. In fact, He actually went the opposite way, making things hard and challenging to filter for those that God was working in them. So the idea of joining God where He's at work is the idea of saying that we can't convince anybody. We can't make anything happen. We've got to identify where God is already moving in the human heart and join Him in that. So a passage that I love is in Romans chapter 1. And Paul says that he's not ashamed of the gospel. Maybe you've heard this before. He's not ashamed of the gospel, for in it is the power of God to the Jew first, and then also to the Greek, for all those who believe. And so there's this reality that the gospel carries power in it, that it's not like philosophy where we're trying to describe and explain and create a system of thought that explains what exists. No, the gospel comes in and it creates space for itself. It's a kingdom that begins to create space in the human heart and then changes the lives of those that intersect. So in that, the gospel makes space for itself is the phrase I often like to use. So when we proclaim the good news to the human heart and they hear and they receive it, it begins to make space in their heart and their life as they count the cost and adjust everything to respond to what God is doing. So what does that mean for this idea of joining God where He's at work? It means that we don't try to convince people of the mission and vision, but instead we're looking for those that God is at work in so that we can come along and help them to count the cost and to build a lifestyle that God can use. Does that make sense? So that means that as we are filtering for and trying to find those leaders to pour deeply into, we're looking for those that are envisioned primarily with the Great Commission. One of the big pieces that I look for when I'm filtering for and trying to find those that God is working in is, what is their vision? And does it line up with the Great Commission, the primary mission that Jesus has called all of His disciples into and all of His leaders to focus on? So there's a lot of aspects of the kingdom of God, right, that we could focus our time and our energy on. And there's a lot of needs out there that we could focus on. And a lot of those things are not bad or wrong, but what can end up happening is this picture of a donut with a hole in the middle. And I use this often to talk about the kingdom of God. And we can begin to talk about mission and all kinds of parts of the kingdom and all these things, but we leave out the center, the hole in the donut. There's a hole in the donut, and that is the core missionary task: to multiply disciples, to plant churches, to raise up leaders that multiply disciples and raise up leaders. And that's what the Great Commission's about. So you can end up with a donut with a hole in the middle if you are not careful, and you're doing all this activity of mission, but you've missed out on the core, which is to make disciples and raise up leaders. So in all of that, joining God where He's at work, there's a lot of ways we could talk about that. We could talk about the needs of the homeless on the side of the road. We could talk about the issues of social justice that are happening in our world. And I'm not saying that those things do not deserve attention, and God's heart of justice is not for those things. He is for those things. But the reality is, if we're not careful, we can end up with a donut with a hole in the middle. Our job is to focus on the core task, and then those things happen to be the overflow often of us focusing on the core task, which is making disciples. So where is God at work? The question is, where is He envisioning the heart of those that are coming out of the harvest, those that are hearing the gospel for the first time? And are they going to respond to this call to make disciples? And where, as you begin to interact with those that are churched and those that are longtime believers, as you begin to cast vision and hear their vision, where does it line up with the Great Commission? Because those are the ones that you can come alongside, help envision them and help them take steps towards the call that Jesus gives to all disciples, which is to multiply disciples as the core missionary task, the middle of the donut. So it's my prayer for you that you don't get caught up in a lot of activity that might be good, but doesn't actually lead to multiplication and into the primary core task that God has commissioned us to do, to make disciples. So joining God where he's at work, it looks like identifying those that are Great Commission envisioned and those that are committed to this core task so that they can accomplish what Jesus has commissioned his church to do, and accomplish the primary goal, which he describes in Matthew 24:14, that this gospel of the kingdom would be proclaimed to every tongue, tribe, nation, all the ethnic, all the people groups would hear, and then the end will come. So that will involve an overflow into justice and many, many things that are wrong being put right. But the question is, what is the core task, and how do we join him where he's at work? So hope that's helpful, and I hope that gives you some eyes to see of what do we mean when we say joining God where he's at work. There's a lot of things we could be doing, but don't end up with a donut with the hole in the middle where you're doing a lot of great stuff, but you end up with the kingdom without the king. You get all of the stuff that the kingdom might involve at some point as Jesus comes back, and some of it's going to happen now as well. I'm not saying that God doesn't want to bring that kingdom now as well, but you end up with a donut with a hole in the middle where the primary task is not being focused on. So joining God where he's at work looks like joining him in this Great Commission work. Hope that's helpful for you guys. I'll see you guys next time.